Hey guys, my name is Ben Suttmeyer. I'm a photographer based in Singapore, and today, thanks to Vivo, I'm going to be testing out the new Vivo X50 Pro smartphone. Now this thing's got some pretty unique features on it, so I want to show you first what they are, how you can use them, and how you can get the most out of them as well. So with that said, let's get started. That sequence you just saw was shot entirely on the X50 Pro. I want to show you how you can take similar looking shots, but before we do that, let's take a look at what's going on the back of this phone. So in addition to the front-facing selfie camera, this thing's also got 4 other rear-facing cameras. First, there's an 8 megapixel f2.2 super wide angle, a 13 megapixel professional portrait camera, and an 8 megapixel telescopic camera that supports up to 60 times zoom. And then there's the main camera, which has 48 megapixels and an aperture of f1.6. And that brings me to the coolest and most unique feature of the entire phone, which is the fact that this is the first smartphone to have a built-in gimbal system. In the past, other smartphones have used built-in software to stabilize your footage, but this can result in the footage actually being cropped down, and it can have imperfections at times as well. On the other hand, this camera actually has a gimbal, so let's see how it works. I think the best way is to actually head out into the field and take a look. So let's fire up the camera and see how the gimbal works. You can see an animated ball moving around in the center, and this is called the gimbal radar. The movement of this ball indicates the gimbal compensating for any motion or shake. As long as you keep the ball in the center circle, it should be steady. You can see if I start moving the camera to the left, the ball moves to the right, and if I move the camera to the right, the ball moves to the left. Same thing if I move it up or down. Even if I start twitching the phone up and down like this, the gimbal does a nice job keeping the frame stable and there's virtually no jitter at all. In order to get extra steady shots while walking around, another feature you'll want to know is in video mode. You can click this icon up at the top and you'll enable the ultra stability mode. So now I'm out in downtown Singapore and I want to show you how you can utilize the gimbal function along with some cinematic movements to get the most out of this camera. So the first cinematic movement is called the push-in. We're basically just going to walk forward, and this is a good way to introduce a subject. The next move is the pull-out. It's pretty much the same thing, but this time we're walking backwards, which is a good way to transition out of a scene. For cinematic movement number 3, we'll do the follow. This can be used the same way as the first two, but in this case we're going to introduce a human element with my friend Tim here, and walk at the same speed to add something to the scene. You can go forward or backward, it doesn't really matter, just make sure you keep a consistent distance from the subject. Next up is the parallax. You'll want to walk really carefully for this one and make sure that your subject stays right in the center of the screen. This will make it look like the background is moving around him while he remains still. And finally, another cool effect that you can pull off with this phone is to enter time-lapse mode while walking. Effectively, this will give you a hyperlapse. You'll need to walk extra carefully for this one to make sure it's completely stable, but it's impressive how steady you can get this if you do it right. Afterwards, the phone will automatically stitch all your shots together and the end result should look something like this. So hopefully you can see from those clips that even if you're walking around, the footage on the X50 Pro is super smooth, especially if you start comparing that to something without stabilization. Now the gimbal is great for video, but it can be used for photo as well. This is going to be most apparent when you're shooting in low light or if you're shooting while on the move. You can see a huge difference between night mode with the gimbal activated and regular photo mode without the gimbal. Using the extra stability, the camera is able to expose for longer and pull more detail out of the shadows. Not to mention that all the cameras hold up really well in regular conditions as well. I'll put up some photos on the screen so you can compare the differences between each of the 4 rear-facing cameras. Overall, I was pretty impressed by how sharp the photos came out from each of the 4 cameras, especially considering that this phone is priced at 1,099 Singapore dollars, which is quite a bit cheaper than some of the other flagship 2020 models. So who is this phone actually for then? I think if having high-end camera capabilities while you're on the move is a high priority on your list, then this is probably a good place to start. The added bonus of having that gimbal system in there to make sure that your photos come out sharp, even if you're shooting in low light or if you're walking around casually, I think that's a really big advantage as well. And especially for video shooters, having that gimbal in there is something that really sets this phone apart from the competition. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the Vivo X50 Pro. I hope that you found that useful and interesting at the same time. So with that said, have a good one and take care.